Lobelia, Lobelia inflata, otherwise known as Indian tobacco or pukeweed. Lobelia is the genus name after Lobelius, who in the early 1600s in Flanders in France was first to put the plants in families. He predated Linnaeus, and together they came up with the taxonomic system that we use these days: genus, species, family, etc. I usually don't like plants to be named after old white guys, but Lobelius was special. He was really smart, and he deserves some recognition for that. Inflata, the species name, because of the inflated or seemingly inflated seed pods on the plant. They're actually filled with the very tiny seeds. There are 18,000 lobelia seeds in a gram, and thus the plant is a vigorous self-seeder, and it has these perfect flowers. Perfect flowers meaning that they have both male and female parts and are self-fertile, but assisted in cross-pollination by bees and other insects. Samuel Thompson in the early 1800s was the first to popularize lobelia in medicine. And in many ways, he was the progenitor of natural medicine, because prior to that time, the doctors were using a lot of leeches to draw blood out of people, and they were using a lot of mercury in their therapies, which was downright poisonous. So Samuel Thompson was like to say, in life heat and in death cold, a kind of an oversimplification, but his methodology was to use cayenne and sweat baths to heat up the body, and then to give a lobelia emetic, which is enough lobelia to make you puke. So he had a lot of detractors. As with anyone who seeks to do good in the world, it seems like somebody wants to put them down. And what they liked to say was, I puke, I purge, I sweat them, and if they die, I let them. But Samuel Thompson has his place in herbal history. Subsequent herbalists used more dilute forms of the herb, which is considered to be a low-dose botanical, works best at low doses. And they also combined lobelia with other herbs in formula. For instance, Jethro Kloss in the early 1900s had a famous antispasmodic formula with skullcap, cayenne, lobelia, and skunk cabbage. And this was used for treating spasms, cramps, seizures, even myocardial infarctions. It kind of brought the dead back to life and was really useful for treating a Charlie horse, which is a muscle spasm that just won't quit. Ed Smith in the early 1970s came up with a compound containing lobelia. It was the Avena licorice compound, which was a smoking cessation compound. Now, lobeline, which is the active alkaloid, is actually very similar in structure to nicotine. These molecules attach to acetylcholine receptors in the musculature, the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and the brain. And that's why tobacco addiction is so difficult to overcome. The idea is that lobeline, which is not in itself addictive, will attach to the same receptors and provide some assistance in cessation from smoking addiction. But the FDA in 1993 shut down all the products that contained lobelia for smoking cessation because they did tests on lobelia and decided that it may or may not work. The problem is that when you do a test on an isolated alkaloid, it doesn't really represent the whole herb because lobelia contains other alkaloids that have opposite effects to lobelia. And also, for instance, with Ed Smith's compound, he had oats in there, licorice, calamus, other herbs that assist the activity of the lobelia and also cause to dilute it, which is really quite important in terms of making sure that people don't have side effects like puking. My book, Making Plant Medicine, dates to the year 2000, and on page 78 you'll find the compound cough syrup of spikenard, which is Aurelia californica, elecampane, and lobelia. In that book, you can also find the formula for making lobelia tincture. And that's really one place where tincture making takes precedence over other dosage forms because you can be more careful about diluting the plant by measuring the contents of the tincture. 1 gram of herb goes to 10 ml of liquid, which is a fairly dilute formula. And then if you use this in a compound with other herbs, then you use only 1/10 part of the tincture in the compound. You come up with a 1 part in 100 dilution, which is a low dose botanical, and you can expect it to do what it's supposed to do without having any negative side effects. A few agronomic details. So lobelia is a biennial or overwintering annual, sometimes annual. It's a weed of agricultural fields like in the east and southeast United States, where it's native. You find it coming up in abandoned cornfields is a classic spot for it. You know, lobelia is a alkaloid. It's a nitrogen-based compound. So if you find the plant growing in places where there's been a lot of nitrogen used in the soil, like in old cornfields, then it's likely to have a higher content of the active principle than if it was just grown in mellow loam soil. So to keep the alkaloid content down, you want to make sure not to use a lot of nitrogenous fertilizers on the plant. You look at the way that the plant reproduces itself in nature, and then you mimic that in agriculture. That's natural gardening techniques. That's at the core of my approach. So the plant drops its seeds in the summer to fall, and they germinate underneath the parent plant. The parent plant dies away, and the rosette continues on through the winter and then comes to flower again in the early spring through into the summer. So if you want to plant it, you plant it in the fall, outdoors, and take care of the plants through the winter, and then you'll have lobelia in the spring. It's very cold tolerant in that form. It's a little bit more convenient for me to start the plants early on in the spring, actually late winter in the greenhouse. I'll start my lobelia in January and prick the seedlings into pots. You surface sow, press into the surface, keep it in the light. It's an easy germinator, although very tiny. mix the seed with sand to stretch it so that you don't have all the seedlings coming up in a clump. Then I leave those plants in the greenhouse until early spring, when I'm starting to get really antsy to put some plants out to the field. It's April. I know I can't plant my tomatoes and peppers yet, but I can plant my lobelia out to the garden. It doesn't mind the frost. I choose a few frost-free days. I set the plants into the row, and then they do just fine early on in the spring. So I make an early harvest of the green plant in the seed pod stage and dry that for herb. And then here's one that was cut back and dried for herb, and it's already regrowing, so I can get 2 cuttings. And then I leave the rest of the plants in the field and allow them to completely mature out, and those I can cut and dry and then shake and get the seed. The seed is highest in lobeline content, and there's demand for the seed both for replanting and for making herbal products. There's some seed that's drying on the plant right there. So once it looks like that, then it's time to cut it, bring it in, put it on paper, let it dry, and make it into the pure seed. May you continue to use the whole herbs and use them intelligently. May you continue to use them according to formula so that you create good and no harm.